Let's have a closer look now at some of the stories in Behind the Headlines. And hugs could be coming back. In the Huffington Post, news that having a COVID-19 vaccine reduces a person's chances of passing the virus on by almost 50%. And this is obviously very important news in the fight against the pandemic. The Electoral Commissioner here in the United Kingdom has launched an investigation into how Prime Minister Boris Johnson funded renovation work at his Downing Street apartment. We did the story, of course, at the top of the programme. The Guardian here, every publication in the UK is covering this and wondering, some of them, if the PM is in danger of losing his job. Another story from here in the UK is about drivers will soon be allowed to take their hands off the wheel, apparently, because self-driving cars could be on British roads by the end of the year, but they'll only be able to go 37 miles an hour. That translates to about 60 kilometres per hour. And to quote one of her own songs, the relationship between Britney Spears and her father could well be described as toxic. Actually, his lawyer says that's not the case, but he would, wouldn't he? Because Britney is in court against him. And Britney, she's 39 years old now. She's asked for permission to address the court in the case against her father. He has control over her estate and financial affairs. That's in the New York Times. The French-Algerian journalist Nabila Ramdani is here, and political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Nigel Nelson, is here. We'll get on to Britney, and I said she's 39 because obviously we've all watched her grow up from being this sort of Disney singer to being this huge, huge superstar in the world of pop. But, OK, let's go with COVID-19, left to right, as always. Nabila, this is really, really obviously important because transmission is one of the key issues, let alone if you get COVID-19 and the treatment that you have to have and whatever the health system, the strains that healthcare is placed under when someone gets COVID-19, you want to stop someone getting corona at all.
Well, absolutely right. But I don't think that you have to be any kind of scientist, let alone a medic, to deduce that the first vaccine dose out of 2 does you a lot of good and logically halves your chance of getting a disease. But here researchers go a stage further and they tell us that a single dose of coronavirus vaccine can reduce household transmission of the virus by up to half. And beyond all the specific details of the research, the bottom line is that this is exactly what we want to hear as we all dream of getting out of this pandemic nightmare. And governments have claimed that lockdowns have been hugely important in the fight against the disease. And of course, they have certainly reduced a lot of deaths and indeed ill health. But there is no doubt whatsoever that vaccines are the real solution in all this. And I think that beyond the elation of the politicians about research breakthroughs, we are all very keen to know what actually happens to our bodies when we are taking these vaccines. And I think for most people, the priority will naturally to protect themselves. But our duty to the rest of society is paramount too. And it's excellent to know that our chances of passing on a disease diminish after we've had a jab. And it's interesting that so many vaccine stories solely involve one jab at the moment, because that's clearly what most people have had so far. But we can be sure that, a 2-jab story will come up pretty soon in the news, along with ones about vaccine passports and indeed autumn booster jab programs and the like.
Yeah, absolutely, Nigel. I mean, apart from everything that Nabila has mentioned, there's also the fact that it's going to help international travel to open up again, because if the vaccine stops transmission, that's what the host country that you're traveling to is going to be most worried about, of course.
Yes, absolutely. Basically, this was the great unknown, that we knew that the vaccine stopped serious illness and therefore hospitalizations and deaths, which was the most important thing. Now we know it can actually deal with transmission. It opens up a whole new field of things we might be able to do. So going to pubs, restaurants, nightclubs, theatres, cinemas, all that will become, we will know will be on the cards. in closed spaces like prisons, it'll be absolutely invaluable. And of course, as you say, foreign travel. So this is such good news. I mean, everyone hoped that transmission would be dealt with, but now we see that it is. And of course, that leads on to the next stage when young people can have the vaccine because they're the ones who are most likely to spread the disease, or they don't have many symptoms.
Yep, absolutely, 100%. Let's move on to the next story. Nigel, do you think there's a danger of Boris Johnson losing his job as Prime Minister because of the scandals that are mounting up around him and around senior members of his party?
Yes, I do. However, I've been covering British politics now for more than 30 years, and things that would have brought down other prime ministers, this particular one seems to survive. So, I mean, stuff like his cavalier disregard for the truth, his extramarital affairs, all these were kind of priced in with the voters, and that's what's enabled him to survive so far. Now, obviously, the issue over the Downing Street flat and exactly who paid for it, we'll eventually know at some point, is a problem for him. But a much greater problem was the one that Keir Starmer identified in the House of Commons today, when the Prime Minister was forced to deny that he'd ever said the bodies can pile up rather than have another lockdown. Now, it's all very well the Prime Minister lying to journalists. He'd made the same statement before, but lying to the House of Commons in the United Kingdom is the most serious thing a politician can do. And if it turns out that Boris Johnson did say that, again, he says he didn't, but if it turns out there's evidence he did say that, then he will have to go.
OK, Keir Starmer, just for the benefit of international viewers, the leader of the main opposition Labour Party here in the United Kingdom. Nabila, I'll say it because there's no way that I'm going to be taken to court. Boris Johnson has lied before he became Prime Minister. He lied when he was not even a member of Parliament. It's been proven. His employers have said, I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave this job. I have to let you go because you've lied. OK, he's been confronted about that in public, and he literally, at times, hasn't been able to answer the question when interviewers have said to him, why did you say this lie? What do you make of this whole story about the flat? Are there bigger stories around Boris Johnson as Prime Minister at the moment?
Well, what you're saying is absolutely right. But the problem with Boris Johnson's sleaze stories is that they're a bit like royal family scandal stories, in that there have been so many that you don't really know when you're meant to be shocked anymore. And he may be the Prime Minister of Britain, but the allegations swirling around Johnson in recent years have been absolutely astonishing. And they just go on and on and on. And there seems to be a particularly damning tone to the latest allegations, however, to the extent that some are suggesting that Johnson may finally be in very serious trouble. As Nigel suggested, on the surface, a flat refurbishment does not sound like it involves hugely serious corruption. But the issue is, of course, opening up all kinds of other dark accusations that portray Johnson in a very bad light indeed. And it can often be that a relatively mundane matter is the one that finally proves the fatal one for a serial offender. And for the first time in a long time, it appears that the Labour Party is actually doing its job as an opposition party, to the extent that Johnson is sounding very angry indeed about their questions. And Johnson will now, of course, face an investigation, to put it bluntly, about who has coughed up for the refurbishment of the number 11 Downing Street flat. He now claims that he has paid for it all. But one would hope that the investigation would be more thorough and has more impact than those carried out against his colleagues, and most notably his notoriously dodgy Interior Minister, Priti Patel. I mean, she's meant to be in charge of law and order in Britain, but has got away with everything from breaking the ministerial code to carrying out unauthorized visits to Israeli leaders. So whatever the result of the inquiry, it is pretty clear to anybody that the Conservative Party is confirming its reputation, not just as the nasty party, but also as the sleazy party. OK, 5 minutes left, two stories. Nabila, would you get behind a driverless car? You could call it a
self-driving car or driverless car?
I must admit that whenever I see stories about self-driving cars, my first reaction is, what can possibly go wrong? And I suspect that a huge amount can go wrong. And when it does, it won't be like your lawnmower or coffee machine playing up. We know from the vehicles that we drive ourselves that accidents are horribly common. And they are just likely to be caused by people driving into you or weather event or whatever, rather than because of anything intrinsically wrong with the technology of the vehicle. So I'm a bit worried about this story, to be perfectly honest.
Nigel, what I think, having worked with different IoT projects, Internet of Things projects, is that it's once all cars are driverless that we'll be at our safest, because they'll all react instantaneously to what the other cars are doing. But while some humans are driving cars and others have driverless decisions being made, that's where the danger comes in.
Yes, but I mean, obviously, 9 out of 10 accidents are caused by human error, so obviously we'll get rid of that. What worries me about them is that whether or not all the various legal and moral issues are being sorted out. If you do have an accident, who's actually responsible? Is it the driver of the car, the designer, or the maker? In America, they're employing moral philosophers to try and get the makers to program in moral kind of reaction. So, for instance, if a pedestrian steps out in front of you, will the robot car protect the driver in the car, whereas the human driver would swerve from the pedestrian? Will a robot car keep to the speed limit, even if you have an ambulance trying to get past you behind you? And if that happened, a human driver would get out of the way. So there's a whole host of issues that, like Nabila, I'd like to see resolved before we get there.
Yeah, really, really interesting moral questions being raised that are all going to have to be confronted sooner rather than later. OK, let's end with Britney Spears. Nigel, it just shows how difficult it is. I mean, you could pick anybody. Pick Michael Jackson, for example. When you're so famous that your life doesn't become your own, the pressure can just become too intense. So it was 2008. Britney Spears was being psychologically and psychiatrically assessed, that her father became the controller of her estate. And now she wants it back.
Yes, and I rather hope that she gets it back, that I hope Britney is actually well now, after all the mental health issues that she's had before. I mean, the issue has been that she's allegedly frightened of her father, and now she's prepared to get up and go into court and confront him. And there's a whole kind of free Britney movement which has built up around her with her fans. And given that she's actually been, you talk about the pressure, she's been a huge star since the age of 15. That's far too young for the kind of fame she's had, and no wonder that she went a bit off the rails. So not only do we have the Free Britney movement, let's hope that Britney is now free of her demons.
Nabila, hit me, baby, one more time.
Well, to be perfectly honest, I mean, there might be a showbizy element to this story, and it might sound rather silly, but there is a very serious element, because it's ultimately about mental health, as Nigel has suggested. I mean, the singer's father, Jamie Spears, was granted control over her affairs in a court in 2008, and the order was originally granted after Britney ended up in hospital after a nervous breakdown. Now she's 39 and clearly wants to manage her own affairs, but it may not be as simple as paying extremely expensive lawyers to win her case. I think beyond the mental health issues, this is also very much a story about child stars and the often very sad lives that they have when they become adults. And we can only hope that Britney manages to sort this out.
Yeah, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head, as always, Nabila, and so do you, Nigel. Always a pleasure. Nabila Ramdani and Nigel Nelson, thank you so much indeed. See you next time, but that is today's Behind the Headlines. Take care.